Section 26 of Thrift. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Thrift by Samuel Smiles. Healthy Homes, Part 1. The best security for civilization is the dwelling. B. Disraeli. Cleanliness is the elegance of the poor. English proverb. Sanitas sanitatum et omnia sanitas. Julius Minocius. Virtue never dwelt long with filth and nastiness. Count Rumford. More servants wait on man than he'll take notice of. In every path he treads down that which doth befriend him, when sickness makes him pale and wan. George Herbert. Health is said to be wealth. Indeed, all wealth is valueless without health. Every man who lives by labor, whether of mind or body, regards health as one of the most valuable of possessions. Without it, life would be unenjoyable. The human system has been so framed as to render enjoyment one of the principal ends of physical life. The whole arrangement, structure, and functions of the human system are beautifully adapted for that purpose. The exercise of every sense is pleasurable. The exercise of sight, hearing, taste, touch, and muscular effort. What can be more pleasurable, for instance, than the feeling of entire health? Health, which is the sum total of the functions of life, duly performed. Enjoyment, says Dr. Southwood Smith, is not only the end of life, but it is the only condition of life which is compatible with a protracted term of existence. The happier a human being is, the longer he lives. The more he suffers, the sooner he dies. To add to enjoyment is to lengthen life. To inflict pain is to shorten its duration. Happiness is the rule of healthy existence. Pain and misery are its exceptional conditions. Nor is pain altogether an evil. It is rather a salutary warning. It tells us that we have transgressed some rule, violated some law, disobeyed some physical obligation. It is a monitor which warns us to amend our state of living. It virtually says, return to nature, observe her laws, and be restored to happiness. Thus, paradoxical though it may seem, pain is one of the conditions of the physical well-being of man, as death, according to Dr. Thomas Brown, is one of the conditions of the enjoyment of life. To enjoy physical happiness, therefore, the natural laws must be complied with. To discover and observe these laws, man has been endowed with the gift of reason. Does he fail to exercise this gift? Does he neglect to comply with the law of his being? Then pain and disease are the necessary consequence. Man violates the laws of nature in his own person, and he suffers accordingly. He is idle and overfeeds himself. He is punished by gout, indigestion, or apoplexy. He drinks too much. He becomes bloated, trembling, and weak. His appetite falls off, his strength declines, his constitution decays, and he falls a victim to the numerous diseases which haunt the steps of the drunkard. Society suffers in the same way. It leaves districts undrained and streets uncleaned. Masses of the population are allowed to live crowded together in unwholesome dens, half poisoned by the mephitic air of the neighborhood. Then a fever breaks out, or a cholera, or a plague. Disease spreads from the miserable abodes of the poor into the comfortable homes of the rich, carrying death and devastation before it. The misery and suffering incurred in such cases are nothing less than willful, inasmuch as the knowledge necessary to avert them is within the reach of all. Wherever any number of persons live together, the atmosphere becomes poisoned, unless means be provided for its constant change and renovation. If there be not sufficient ventilation, the air becomes charged with carbonic acid, principally the product of respiration. Whatever the body discharges becomes poison to the body if introduced again through the lungs. Hence the immense importance of pure air. A deficiency of food may be considerably less injurious than a deficiency of pure air. Every person above 14 years of age requires about 600 cubic feet of shut-up space to breathe in during the 24 hours. Footnote 1. Where 600 cubic feet of space is allowed, the air requires to be changed by ventilation 5 times in the hour in order to keep it pure. The best amount of space to be allowed for a healthy adult is about 800 cubic feet. The air which is breathed becomes so rapidly impure that a constant supply of fresh air must be kept up to make the air of the shut-up space fit for breathing. The following are some amounts of space per head which are met with in practice. Artisan rooms, 200 cubic feet. Metropolitan lodging houses, 240 cubic feet. Poor law board dormitories, 300 cubic feet. Barrack regulation, 60 cubic feet. The best hospitals, 1,500 to 2,000 cubic feet. End of footnote 1. If he sleeps in a room of smaller dimensions, he will suffer more or less, and gradually approach the condition of being smothered. Shut up a mouse in a glass receiver, and it will gradually die by re-breathing its own breath. Shut up a man in a confined space, and he will die in the same way. The English soldiers expired in the black hole of Calcutta because they wanted pure air. Thus about half the children born in some manufacturing towns die before they are 5 years old, principally because they want pure air. Humboldt tells of a sailor who was dying of fever in the close hold of a ship. His comrades brought him out of his hold to die in the open air. Instead of dying, he revived and eventually got well. He was cured by the pure air. The most common result of breathing impure air amongst adults is fever. The heaviest municipal tax, said Dr. Southwood Smith, is the fever tax. It is estimated that in Liverpool some 7,000 persons are yearly attacked by fever, of whom about 500 die. Fever usually attacks persons of between 20 and 30, or those who generally have small families depending on them for support. Hence, death from fever, by causing widowhood and orphanage, impose a very heavy tax upon the inhabitants of all the large manufacturing towns. Dr. Playfair, after carefully considering the question, is of opinion that the total pecuniary loss inflicted on the county of Lancashire from preventable disease, sickness, and death amounts to not less than 5 million sterling annually. But this is only the physical and pecuniary loss. The moral loss is infinitely greater. Where are now the happy humble swains and the gentle shepherds of the old English poets? At the present time they are nowhere to be found. The modern Strephon and Phyllis are a very humble pair, living in a clay-floored cottage and maintaining a family on from 12 to 15 shillings a week. And so far from Strephon spending his time in sitting by a purling stream, playing roundelays upon a pipe. Poor fellow, he can scarcely afford to smoke one. His hours of labour are so long, and his wages are so small. As for Daphnis, he's a lout, and can neither read nor write, nor is his Chloe any better. Phineas Fletcher thus sang of the shepherd's home. Thrice, oh thrice, happy shepherd's life and state, when courts are happinessy, unhappy pawns. His cottage low and safely humble gate shuts out proud fortune with her scorns and fawns. No feared treason breaks his quiet sleep, singing all day his flocks he learns to keep, himself as innocent as are his simple sheep. His certain life that never can deceive him is full of thousand sweets and rich content. The smooth-leaved beeches in the field receive him with coolest shades till noontide's rage is spent. His life is neither tossed in boisterous seas of troublous world, nor lost in slothful ease. Pleased and full blessed he lives, when he his God can please. Where, oh where, has this gentle shepherd gone? Have spinning jennies swallowed him up? Alas, as was observed of Mrs. Harris, there is no such person. Did he ever exist? We have a strong suspicion that he never did, save in the imaginations of poets. Before the age of railroads and sanitary reformers, the pastoral life of the Acadians was a beautiful myth. The Blue Book men have exploded it forever. The agricultural labourers have not decent houses, only miserable huts to live in. They have but few provisions for cleanliness or decency. 2 rooms for sleeping and living in are all that the largest family can afford. Sometimes they have only 1. The day room, in addition to the family, contains the cooking utensils, the washing apparatus, agricultural implements, and dirty clothes. In the sleeping apartment, the parents and their children, boys and girls, are indiscriminately mixed, and frequently a lodger sleeps in the same and only room, which has generally no window. The openings in the half-thatched roof admitting light, and exposing the family to every vicissitude of the weather. The husband, having no comfort at home, seeks it in the beer shop. The children grow up without decency or self-restraint. As for the half-hearted wives and daughters, their lot is very miserable. It is not often that village affairs are made the subject of discussion in newspapers, for the power of the press has not yet reached remote country places. But we do hear occasionally of whole villages being pulled down and razed in order to prevent them becoming nests of beggars' brats. A member of Parliament did not hesitate to confess before a parliamentary committee that he had pulled down between 26 and 30 cottages which, had they been left standing, would have been inhabited by young married couples. And what becomes of the dispossessed? They crowd together in the cottages which are left standing, if their owners will allow it. Or they crowd into the workhouses, or, more generally, they crowd into the towns, where there is at least some hope of employment for themselves and their children. Our manufacturing towns are not at all what they ought to be, not sufficiently pure, wholesome, or well regulated. But the rural labourers regard even the misery of towns as preferable to the worse misery of the rural districts, and year by year they crowd into the seats of manufacturing industry in search of homes and employment. This speaks volumes as to the actual state of our boasted peasantry, the country's pride. The intellectual condition of the country labourers seems to be on a par with their physical state. Those in the western counties are as little civilized as the poor people in the east of London. A report of the Diocesan Board of the County of Hereford states that a great deal of the superstition of past ages lingers in our parishes. The observation of lucky and unlucky days and season is by no means unusual. The phases of the moon are regarded with great respect. In one, medicine may be taken, in another it is advisable to kill a pig. Over the doors of many houses may be found twigs placed crosswise and never suffered to lose their cruciform position, and the horseshoe preserves its old station on many a stable door. Charms are devoutly believed in. A ring made from a shilling, offered at the communion, is an undoubted cure for fits. Hair plucked from the crop of an ass's shoulder and woven into a chain to be put round a child's neck is powerful for the same purpose. And the hand of a corpse applied to the neck is believed to disperse a ven. The evil eye, so long dreaded in uneducated countries, has its terrors among us, and if a person of ill life be suddenly called away, there are generally some who hear his tokens or see his ghost. There exists, besides, the custom of communicating death to hives of bees, in the belief that they invariably abandon their owners if the intelligence be withheld. Sidney Smith has said, with more truth than elegance, that in the infancy of all nations, even the most civilized, men lived the life of pigs. And if sanitary reporters had existed in times past as they do now, we should doubtless have received an account of the actual existent and domestic accommodation of the old English swains and shepherds, very different from that given by Phineas Fletcher. Even the mechanics of this day are more comfortably lodged than the great landed gentry of the Saxon and Norman periods, and if the truth could be got at, it would be found that bad as is the state of our agricultural labourers now, the condition of their forefathers was no better. The first method of raising a man above the life of an animal is to provide him with a healthy home. The home is, after all, the best school for the world. Children grow up into men and women there. They imbibe their best and their worst morality there, and their morals and intelligence are in a great measure well or ill-trained there. Man can only be really and truly humanized and civilized through the institution of the home. There is domestic purity and moral life in the good home, and individual defilement and moral death in the bad one. The schoolmaster has really very little to do with the formation of the characters of children. These are formed in the home by the father and mother, by brothers, sisters, and companions. It does not matter how complete may be the education given in schools. It may include the whole range of knowledge, yet if the scholar is under the necessity of daily returning to a home which is indecent, vicious, and miserable, all this learning will prove of comparatively little value. Character and disposition are the result of home training, and if these are, through bad physical and moral conditions, deteriorated and destroyed, the intellectual culture acquired in the school may prove an instrumentality for evil rather than for good. The home should not be considered merely as an eating and sleeping place, but as a place where self-respect may be preserved, and comfort secured, and domestic pleasures enjoyed. 3/4 of the petty vices which degrade society and swell into crimes which disgrace it, would shrink before the influence of self-respect. To be a place of happiness, exercising beneficial influences upon its members, and especially upon the children growing up within it, the home must be pervaded by the spirit of comfort, cleanliness, affection, and intelligence. And in order to secure this, the presence of a well-ordered, industrious, and educated woman is indispensable. So much depends upon the woman that we might almost pronounce the happiness or unhappiness of the home to be the woman's work. No nation can advance except through the improvement of the nation's homes, and these can only be improved through the instrumentality of women. They must know how to make homes comfortable, and before they can know, they must have been taught. Women must, therefore, have sufficient training to fit them for their duties in real life. Their education should be conducted throughout with a view to their future position as wives, mothers, and housewives. But amongst all classes, even the highest, the education of girls is rarely conducted with this object. Amongst the working people, the girls are sent out to work. Amongst the higher classes, they are sent out to learn a few flashy accomplishments. And men are left to pick from them, very often with little judgment, the future wives and mothers of England. Men themselves attach little or no importance to the intelligence or industrial skill of women, and they only discover their value when they find their home stupid and cheerless. Men are caught by the glance of a bright eye, by a pair of cherry cheeks, by a handsome figure, and when they fall in love, as the phrase goes, they never bethink them of whether the loved one can mend a shirt or cook a pudding. And yet the most sentimental of husbands must come down from his ecstatics as soon as the knot is tied, and then he soon enough finds out that the clever hands of a woman are worth far more than her bright glances. And if the shirt and pudding qualifications be absent, then woe to the unhappy man, and woe also to the unhappy woman. If the substantial element of physical comfort be absent from the home, it soon becomes hateful. The wife, notwithstanding all her good looks, is neglected, and the public house separates those whom the law and the church have joined together. Men are really desperately ignorant respecting the home department. If they thought for a moment of its importance, they would not be so ready to rush into premature housekeeping. Ignorant men select equally ignorant women for their wives, and these introduce into the world families of children whom they are utterly incompetent to train as rational or domestic beings. The home is no home, but a mere lodging, and often a very comfortless one. We speak not merely of the poorest labourers, but of the best-paid workmen in the large manufacturing towns. Men earning from 2 to 3 pounds a week, or more than the average pay of curates and bankers' clerks, though spending considerable amounts on beer, will often grudge so small a part of their income as half a crown a week to provide decent homes for themselves and their children. What is the consequence? They degrade themselves and their families. They crowd together in foul neighborhoods, into dwellings possessing no element of health or decency, where even the small rental which they pay is in excess of the accommodation they receive. The results are inevitable: loss of self-respect, degradation of intelligence, failure of physical health, and premature death. Even the highest-minded philosopher, placed in such a situation, would gradually gravitate towards brutality. But the amount thus saved, or rather not expended on house rent, is not economy, it is reckless waste. The sickness caused by the bad dwelling involves frequent interruptions of work and drains upon the savings bank or the benefit society, and a final and rapid descent to the poor rates. Though the loss to the middle and upper classes is great, the loss is not for a moment to be compared with that which falls upon the working classes themselves through their neglect in providing wholesome and comfortable dwellings for their families. It is, perhaps, not saying too much to aver that 1/2 the money expended by benefit societies in large towns may be set down as pecuniary loss arising from bad and unhealthy homes. But there is a worse consequence still. The low tone of physical health thereby produced is one of the chief causes of drunkenness. Mr. Chadwick once remonstrated with an apparently sensible workman on the expenditure of half his income on whiskey. His reply was, "Do you, sir, come and live here, and you will drink whiskey too." Mr. Lee says, "I would not be understood that habits of intoxication are wholly due to a defective sanitary condition, but no person can have the experience I have had without coming to the conclusion that unhealthy and unhappy homes, loss of vital and consequently of industrial energy, and a consciousness of inability to control external circumstances induce thousands to escape from miserable depression in the temporary excitement of noxious drugs and intoxicating liquors. They are like the seamen who struggle for a while against the evils by which they are surrounded, but at last, seeing no hope, stupefy themselves with drink and perish." It may be said, in excuse, that working people must necessarily occupy such houses as are to be had and pay the rental asked for them, bad and unwholesome though they be. But there is such a thing as supply and demand, and the dwellings now supplied are really those which are most in demand because of their lowness of rental. Were the working classes to shun unwholesome districts and low-priced dwellings, and rent only such tenements as were calculated to fulfill the requirements of a wholesome and cleanly home, the owners of property would be compelled to improve the character of their houses and raise them to the required standard of comfort and accommodation. The real remedy must lie with the working classes themselves. Let them determine to raise their standard of rental, and the reform is in a great measure accomplished. We have already shown how masters have done a great deal for the better accommodation of their workpeople, how the benefactors of the poor, such as Mr. Peabody and Lady Burdett Coutts, have promoted the building of healthy homes. Yet the result must depend upon the individual action of the working classes themselves, when they have the choice of living in a dwelling situated in a healthy locality, and of another situated in an unhealthy locality, they ought to choose the former. But very often they do not. There is perhaps a difference of 6 pence a week in the rental, and, not knowing the advantages of health, they take the unhealthy dwelling because it is the cheapest. But the money that sickly people have to pay for physic, doctor's bills, and loss of wages far more than exceeds the amount saved by cheaper rental, not to speak of the loss of comfort, the want of cleanliness, and the depression of spirits, which is inevitable where foul air is breathed. To build a wholesome dwelling costs little more than to build an unwholesome one. What is wanted on the part of the builder is a knowledge of sanitary conditions and a willingness to provide the proper accommodation. The space of ground covered by the dwelling is the same in both cases. The quantity of bricks and mortar need be no greater, and pure air is of the same price as foul air. Light costs nothing. A healthy home, presided over by a thrifty, cleanly woman, may be the abode of comfort, of virtue, and of happiness. It may be the scene of every ennobling relation in family life. It may be endeared to a man by many delightful memories, by the affectionate voices of his wife, his children, and his neighbors. Such a home will be regarded not as a mere nest of common instinct, but as a training ground for young immortals, a sanctuary for the heart, a refuge from storms, a sweet resting place after labor, a consolation in sorrow, a pride in success, and a joy at all times. Much has been done to spread the doctrines of sanitary science. There is no mystery attached to it. Otherwise, we should have had professors teaching it in colleges, as we have now, and graduates practicing it amongst the people. It is only of recent years that it has received general recognition, and we owe it, not to the medical faculty, but to a barrister, that it has become embodied in many important acts of parliament. End of section 26. Read by Astrid Weinmann, London. Section 27 of Thrift. This is a LibraryVox recording. All LibraryVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit libraryvox.org. Thrift by Samuel Smiles. Healthy Homes, Part 2. Edwin Chadwick has not yet received ordinary justice from his contemporaries, though he has been one of the most indefatigable and successful workers of the age and has greatly influenced the legislation of his time. He is probably less known than many a fourth-rate parliamentary talker. Mr. Chadwick belongs to a Lancashire family and was born near Manchester. He received his education chiefly in London. Having chosen the law for his profession, he was enrolled a student of the Inner Temple in his 26th year. There he ate his way to the bar, maintaining himself by reporting and writing for the daily press. He was not a man of an extraordinary amount of learning, but he was a sagacious and persevering man. He was ready to confront any amount of labor in prosecuting an object, no matter how remote its attainment might at first sight appear to be. At an early period in his career, Edwin Chadwick became possessed by an idea. It is a great thing to be thoroughly possessed by an idea, provided its aim and end be beneficent. It gives a color and bias to the whole of a man's life. The idea was not a new one, but being taken up by an earnest, energetic, and hard-working man, there was some hope for the practical working out of his idea in the actual life of humanity. It was neither more nor less than the sanitary idea, the germ of the sanitary movement. We must now briefly state how he worked his way to its practical realization. It appears that Mr. Morgan, the government actuary, had stated before a parliamentary committee that though the circumstances of the middle classes had improved, their expectation of life had not lengthened. This being diametrically opposed to our student's idea, he endeavored to demonstrate the fallacy of the actuary's opinion. He read up and sifted numerous statistical documents, blue books, life tables, and population tables. He bored his way through the cumbrous pile and brought an accumulation of facts from the most unlooked-for quarters for the purpose of illustrating his idea and elucidating his master thought. The result was published in the Westminster Review for April 1828. Mr. Chadwick demonstrated by an immense array of facts and arguments that the circumstances which surround human beings must have an influence upon their health, that health must improve with an improvement of these circumstances, that many of the diseases and conditions unfavorable to human life were under man's control and capable of being removed, that the practice of vaccination, the diminution of hard drinking amongst the middle and upper classes, the increase of habits of cleanliness, the improvements in medical science, and the better construction of streets and houses must, according to all medical and popular experience, have contributed a priori to lengthen life, and these he proved by a citation of facts from numerous authentic sources. In short, Mr. Morgan was wrong. The expectancy of life, as is now universally admitted, has improved and is rapidly improving amongst the better classes, but it was never thoroughly demonstrated until Edwin Chadwick undertook the discussion of the question. Another article which Mr. Chadwick published in the London Review in 1829 on preventive police was read by Jeremy Bentham, then in his 82nd year, who so much admired it that he craved an introduction to the writer. The consequence was the formation of a friendship that lasted without interruption until the death of the philosopher in 1832. Mr. Bentham wished to engage the whole of his young friend's time in assisting him with the preparation of his administrative code, and he offered to place him in independent circumstances if he would devote himself exclusively to the advancement of his views. The offer was, however, declined. Mr. Chadwick completed his law studies and was called to the bar in November 1830. He was preparing to enter upon the practice of common law, occasionally contributing articles to the Westminster, when he was, in 1832, appointed a commissioner, in conjunction with Dr. Southwood Smith and Mr. Tooke, to investigate the question of factory labour, which Lord Ashley and Mr. Sadler were at that time strongly pressing upon public attention. The sanitary idea again found opportunity for expression in the report of the Commission, which referred to defective drainage, ventilation, water supply and the like as causes of disease, acting concurrently with excessive toil to depress the health and shorten the lives of the factory population. In the same year, 1832, an important commission of inquiry was appointed by Lord Grey's government in reference to the operation of the Poor Laws in England and Wales. Mr. Chadwick was appointed one of the assistant commissioners for the purpose of taking evidence on the subject, and the districts of London and Berkshire were allotted to him. His report, published in the following year, was a model of what a report should be. It was full of information, admirably classified and arranged, and was so racy by virtue of the facts brought to light and the care taken to preserve the very words of the witnesses as they were spoken, that the report may be read with interest by the most inveterate enemy of blue books. Mr. Chadwick showed himself so thoroughly a master of the subject, his suggestions were so full of practical value, that he was, shortly after the publication of the report, advanced from the post of Assistant Commissioner to that of Chief Commissioner, and he largely shared with Mr. Senior in the labours and honours of the Commissioner's report submitted to the House of Commons in 1834, and also in the famous Poor Law Amendment Act passed in the same year, in which the recommendations of the Commissioners were substantially adopted and formalized. One may venture to say now without fear of contradiction, that that law was one of the most valuable that has been placed on the statute book in modern times. And yet no law proved more unpopular than this was, for years after it had been enacted. But Mr. Chadwick never ceased to have perfect faith in the soundness of the principles on which it was based, and he was indefatigable in defending and establishing it. It has been well said that to become popular is an easy thing, but to do unpopular justice, that requires a man. And Edwin Chadwick is the man who has never failed in courage to do the right thing, even though it should prove to be the unpopular thing. Whilst borrowing amidst the voluminous evidence on the poor laws, Mr. Chadwick never lost sight of his sanitary idea. All his reports were strongly imbued with it. 1/4 of the then existing pauperism was traced by him to the preventable causes of disease. His minute investigations into the condition of the labouring population and of the poorer classes generally gave him a thorough acquaintance with the physical evils that were preying upon the community, carrying them off by fevers, consumption, and cholera. And the sanitary idea took still firmer possession of his mind. One day, in 1838, while engaged in his official vocation of secretary to the Poor Law Commission, an officer of the Whitechapel Union hastily entered the boardroom of the Poor Law Commission and, with a troubled countenance, informed the secretary that a terrible fever had broken out round a stagnant pool in Whitechapel, that the people were dying by scores, and that the extreme malignity of the cases gave reason to apprehend that the disease was allied to Asiatic cholera. On hearing this, the board, at Mr. Chadwick's instance, immediately appointed Doctors Arnott, Kay, and Southwood Smith to investigate the causes of this alarming mortality and to report generally upon the sanitary condition of London. This inquiry at length ripened into the sanitary inquiry. In the meantime, Mr. Chadwick had been engaged as a member of the Commission to inquire as to the best means of establishing an efficient constabulary force in England and Wales. The evidence was embodied in a report, as interesting as a novel of Dickens, which afforded a curious insight into the modes of living, the customs and habits of the lowest classes of the population. When this question had been dismissed, Mr. Chadwick proceeded to devote himself almost exclusively to the great work of his life, the sanitary movement. The Bishop of London, in 1839, moved in the Lords that the inquiry which had been made at Mr. Chadwick's instance by Doctors Southwood Smith, Arnott, and Kay into the sanitary state of the metropolis should be extended to the whole population, city, rural, and manufacturing of England and Wales. Some residents in Edinburgh also petitioned that Scotland might be included, and accordingly, in August 1839, Lord John Russell addressed a letter to the Poor Law Board, authorizing them by royal command to extend to the whole of Great Britain the inquiry into preventable disease, which had already been begun with regard to the metropolis. The onerous task of setting on foot and superintending the inquiry throughout, of sifting the evidence and classifying and condensing it for the purposes of publication, devolved upon Mr. Chadwick. The first report on the health of towns was ready for publication in 1842. It ought to have appeared as the official report of the Poor Law Board, but as the commissioners, some of whom were at variance with Mr. Chadwick with respect to the new poor law, refused to assume the responsibility of a document that contained much that must necessarily offend many influential public bodies, Mr. Chadwick took the responsibility upon himself, and it was published as his report, which indeed it was, and accepted from him as such by the commissioners. The amount of dry, hard work encountered by Mr. Chadwick in the preparation of this and his other reports can scarcely be estimated, except by those who know anything of the labor involved in extracting from masses of evidence, written and printed, sent in from all parts of the empire, only the most striking results bearing upon the question in hand, and such as are deemed worthy of publication. The mountains of paper which Mr. Chadwick has thus bored through in his lifetime must have been immense, and could they now be presented before him in one pile, they would appall even his stout heart. The sensation excited throughout the country by the publication of Mr. Chadwick's sanitary report was immense. Such a revelation of the horrors lying concealed beneath the fair surface of our modern civilization had never before been published. But Mr. Chadwick had no idea of merely creating a sensation. He had an object in view, which he persistently pursued. The report was nothing unless its recommendations were speedily carried into effect. A sanitary party was formed, and the ministers, for the time being, aided by members of both sides in politics, became its influential leaders. A sanitary commission was appointed in 1844 to consider the whole question in its practical bearings. The commission published 2 reports with a view to legislation, but the free trade struggle interfered, and little was done for several years. Meanwhile, our sanitary reformer was occupied as a commissioner in inquiring into the condition of the metropolis. The commission published 3 reports in which the defective drainage, sewage and water supply of London were discussed in detail, and these have recently been followed by important acts of legislation. The sanitary idea at length had its triumph in the enactment of the Public Health Act of 1848 and the appointment of a General Board of Health, of which Mr. Chadwick was a member, to superintend its administration. Numerous supplemental measures have since been enacted, with the view of carrying into practical effect the sanitary principles adopted by the board. Reports continue to be published from time to time, full of valuable information, for instance, in reference to the application of sewage water to agricultural purposes, on epidemic cholera, on quarantine, on drainage, on public lodging houses, and the like. The sanitary movement, in short, became a great fact, and that it is so, we have mainly to thank Edwin Chadwick, the missionary of the sanitary idea. It is true, he was eventually dismissed from his position of influence at the Board of Health, partly through spleen, but chiefly because of his own unaccommodating nature. Unaccommodating especially to petty local authorities and individual interests opposed to the public good. But with all thinking and impartial men, his character stands as high as it ever did. At all events, his works remain. We do not know a more striking instance than that presented by this gentleman's career of the large amount of good which a man strongly possessed by a beneficent idea can accomplish, provided he have only the force of purpose and perseverance to follow it up. Though Mr. Chadwick has not been an actual legislator, he has nevertheless been the mover of more wise measures than any legislator of our time, He created a public opinion in favor of sanitary reform. He has also impressed the minds of benevolent individuals with the necessity for providing improved dwellings for the people, and has thus been the indirect means of establishing the Peabody dwellings, the Baroness Coutts dwellings, and the various societies for erecting improved dwellings for the industrial classes. Edwin Chadwick has thus proved himself to be one of the most useful and practical of public benefactors. He deserves to be ranked with Clarkson or Howard. His labours have been equally salutary. Some will say that they have been much more so in their results. Sanitary science may be summed up in the one word: cleanliness. Pure water and pure air are its essentials. Wherever there is impurity, it must be washed away and got rid of. Thus, sanitary science is one of the simplest and most intelligible of all the branches of human knowledge. Perhaps it is because of this that, like most common things, it has continued to receive so little attention. Many still think that it requires no science at all to ventilate a chamber, to clean out a drain, and to keep house and person free from uncleanness. Sanitary science may be regarded as an unsavory subject. It deals with dirt and its expulsion from the skin, from the house, from the street, from the city. It is comprised in the words: wherever there is dirt, get rid of it instantly, and with cleanliness let there be a copious supply of pure water and of pure air for the purposes of human health. Take, for instance, an unhealthy street or block of streets in a large town. There you find typhus fever constantly present. Cleanse and sewer the street. Supply it with pure air and pure water, and fever is forthwith banished. Is not this a much more satisfactory result than the application of drugs? 50,000 persons, says Mr. Lee, annually fall victims to typhus fever in Great Britain, originated by causes which are preventable. The result is the same as if these 50,000 persons were annually taken out of their wretched dwellings and put to death. We are shocked by the news of a murder, by the loss of a single life by physical causes, and yet we hear, almost without a shudder, the reiterated statement of the loss of tens of thousands of lives yearly from physical causes in daily operation. The annual slaughter from preventable causes of typhus fever is double the amount of what was suffered by the Allied armies at the Battle of Waterloo. By neglect of the ascertained conditions of healthful living, the great mass of the people lose nearly half the natural period of their lives. Typhus, says a medical officer, is a curse which man inflicts upon himself by the neglect of sanitary arrangements. Mr. Chadwick affirmed that in the cellars of Liverpool, Manchester and Leeds he had seen amongst the operatives more vice, misery and degradation than those which, when detailed by Howard, had excited the sympathy of the world. The Irish poor sink into the unhealthy closes, lanes and back streets of large towns, and so frequent are the attacks of typhus among them, that in some parts of the country the disease is known as the Irish fever. It is not merely the loss of life that is so frightful, there is also the moral death that is still more appalling in these unhealthy localities. Vice and crime consort with foul living. In these places, demoralization is a normal state. There is an absence of cleanliness, of decency, of decorum. The language used is polluting, and scenes of profligacy are of almost hourly occurrence, all tending to foster idleness, drunkenness, and vicious abandonment. Imagine such a moral atmosphere for women and children. The connection is close and intimate between physical and moral health, between domestic well-being and public happiness. The destructive influence of an unwholesome dwelling propagates a moral typhus worse than the plague itself, where the body is enfeebled by the depressing influences of vitiated air and bodily defilement. The mind, almost of necessity, takes the same low, unhealthy tone. Self-respect is lost. A stupid, inert, languid feeling overpowers the system. The character becomes depraved, and too often, eager to snatch even a momentary enjoyment, to feel the blood bounding in the veins, the miserable victim flies to the demon of strong drink for relief. Hence misery, infamy, shame, crime, and wretchedness. This neglect of the conditions of daily health is a frightfully costly thing. It costs the rich a great deal of money in the shape of poor rates for the support of widows made husbandless and children made fatherless by typhus. It costs them also a great deal in disease, for the fever often spreads from the dwellings of the poor into the homes of the rich, and carries away father, mother, or children. It costs a great deal in subscription to maintain dispensaries, infirmaries, houses of recovery, and asylums for the destitutes. It costs the poor still more. It costs them their health, which is their only capital. In this is invested their all. If they lose it, their docket is struck, and they are bankrupt. How frightful is the neglect, whether it be on the part of society or of individuals, which robs the poor man of his health and makes his life a daily death. Why then is not sanitary science universally adopted and enforced? We fear it is mainly through indifference and laziness. The local authorities, municipalities and boards of guardians are so many Mrs. McLartys in their way. Like that dirty matron, they cannot be fushed. To remove the materials of disease requires industry, constant attention, and, what is far more serious, increased rates. The foul interests hold their ground and bid defiance to the attacks made upon them. Things did very well, they say, in the good old times. Why should they not do so now? When typhus or cholera breaks out, they tell us that nobody is to blame. That terrible nobody! How much he has to answer for! More mischief is done by nobody than by all the world besides. Nobody adulterates our food. Nobody poisons us with bad drink. Nobody supplies us with foul water. Nobody spreads fever in blind alleys and unswept lanes. Nobody leaves towns undrained. Nobody fills jails, penitentiaries, and convict stations. Nobody makes poachers, thieves, and drunkards. Nobody has a theory too, a dreadful theory. It is embodied in 2 words, laissez-faire, let alone. When people are poisoned by plaster of Paris mixed with flour, let alone is the remedy. When Cocculus indicus is used instead of hops and men die prematurely, it is easy to say, nobody did it. Let those who can find out when they are cheated. Caveat emptor. When people live in foul dwellings, let them alone. Let wretchedness do its work. Do not interfere with death. It matters nothing to me, said a rich man, who heard of a poor woman and her sick child being driven forth from a town for begging, The workhouse authorities would have nothing to do with her and sent her away. But the poor woman went and sat down with her child at the rich man's door. The child died there. The contagion of typhus was wafted into the gilded saloon and the luxurious bedchamber, and the rich man's child fell a victim to the disease. But nobody has considerably less power in society than he once had, and our hope is that he may ultimately follow in the wake of old bogey and disappear altogether. Wherever there is suffering and social depression, we may depend upon it that somebody is to blame. The responsibility rests somewhere, and if we allow it to remain, it rests with us. We may not be able to cope with the evil as individuals single-handed, but it becomes us to unite and bring to bear upon the evil the joint moral power of society in the form of a law. A law is but the expression of a combined will, and it does that for society, which society, in its individual and separate action, cannot so well or efficiently do for itself. Laws may do too much. They may meddle with things which ought to be let alone, but the abuse of a thing is no proper argument against its use in cases where its employment is urgently called for. Mere improvement of towns, however, as respects drainage, sewerage, paving, water supply, and abolition of cellar dwellings, will effect comparatively little unless we can succeed in carrying the improvement further, namely, into the homes of the people themselves. A well-devised system of sanitary measures may ensure external cleanliness, may provide that the soil on which the streets of houses are built shall be relieved of all superfluous moisture, and that all animal and vegetable refuse shall be promptly removed, so that the air circulating through the streets and floating from them into the houses of the inhabitants shall not be laden with poisonous miasmata, the source of disease, suffering, and untimely death. Cellar dwellings may be prohibited, and certain regulations as to the buildings hereafter to be erected may also be enforced. But here municipal or parochial authority stops. It can go no further. It cannot penetrate into the home, and it is not necessary that it should do so. The individual efforts of the community themselves are therefore needed, and any legislative enactments which dispensed with these would probably be an evil. The government does not build the houses in which the people dwell. These are provided by employers and by capitalists, small and large. It is necessary, therefore, to enlist these interests in the cause of sanitary improvement in order to ensure success. Individual capitalists have already done much to provide wholesome houses for their working people, and have found their account in so doing by their increased health, as well as in their moral improvement in all ways. Capitalists imbued with a benevolent and philanthropic spirit can thus spread blessings far and wide, and were a few enterprising builders in every town to take up this question practically and provide a class of houses for work people with suitable accommodation, provided with arrangements for ventilation, cleanliness and separation of the sexes, such as health and comfort require, they would really be conferring an amount of benefit on the community at large, and at the same time, we believe, upon themselves, which it would not be easy to overestimate. But there also needs the active cooperation of the dwellers in poor men's homes themselves. They, too, must join cordially in the sanitary movement, otherwise comparatively little good can be effected. You may provide an efficient water supply, yet if the housewife will not use the water as it ought to be used, if she be lazy and dirty, the house will be foul and comfortless still. You may provide for ventilation, yet if offensive matters be not removed, and doors and windows are kept closed, the pure outer air will be excluded, and the house will still smell fusty and unwholesome. In any case, there must be a cleanly woman to superintend the affairs of the house, and she cannot be made so by Act of Parliament. The sanitary commissioners cannot, by any notification, convert the slatternly shrew into a tidy housewife, nor the disorderly drunkard into an industrious, home-loving husband. There must, therefore, be individual effort on the part of the housewife in every working man's home. As a recent writer on home reform observes, we must begin by insisting that, however much of the physical and moral evils of the working classes may be justly attributable to their dwellings, it is too often the case that more ought, in truth, to be attributed to themselves. For surely the inmate depends less on the house than the house on the inmate, as mind has more power over matter than matter over mind. Let a dwelling be ever so poor and incommodious, yet a family with decent and cleanly habits will contrive to make the best of it, and will take care that there shall be nothing offensive in it which they have power to remove. Whereas a model house, fitted up with every convenience and comfort which modern science can supply, will, if occupied by persons of intemperate and uncleanly habits, speedily become a disgrace and a nuisance. A sober, industrious and cleanly couple will impart an air of decency and respectability to the poorest dwelling, while the spendthrift, the drunkard, or the gambler will convert a palace into a scene of discomfort and disgust. Since, therefore, so much depends on the character and conduct of the parties themselves, it is right that they should feel their responsibility in this matter, and that they should know and attend to the various points connected with the improvement of their own homes. While this important truth should be kept steadily in view, every possible exertion ought, at the same time, to be made to provide a greater abundance of comfortable, decent and comely dwellings for the working classes. For it is to be lamented that, in many districts, they are, as it were, forced by the necessities of their condition to gravitate into localities and to inhabit dwellings where decency is rendered almost impossible, where life becomes a slow dying, and where the influences operating on the entire human energies, physical and moral, are of the most deleterious character. End of section 27. Read by Astrid Weinmann, London. Section 28 of Thrift. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Thrift by Samuel Smiles. Healthy Homes, Part 3. Homes are the manufactories of men, and as the homes are, so will the men be. Mind will be degraded by the physical influences around it. Decency will be destroyed by constant contact with impurity and defilement, and coarseness of manners, habits, and tastes will become inevitable. You cannot rear a kindly nature, sensitive against evil, careful of proprieties, and desirous of moral and intellectual improvement amidst the darkness, dampness, disorder, and discomfort which unhappily characterize so large a portion of the dwellings of the poor in our large towns. And until we can, by some means or other, improve their domestic accommodation, their low moral and social condition must be regarded as inevitable. We want not only a better class of dwellings, but we require the people to be so educated as to appreciate them. An Irish landlord took his tenantry out of their mud huts and removed them into comfortable dwellings which he had built for their accommodation. When he returned to his estate, he was greatly disappointed. The houses were as untidy and uncomfortable as before. The pig was still under the bed, and the hens over it. The concrete floor was as dirty as the mud one had been. The panes of the windows were broken, and the garden was full of weeds. The landlord wrote to a friend in despair. The friend replied, "You have begun at the wrong end. You ought to have taught them the value of cleanliness, thriftiness, and comfort." To begin at the beginning, therefore, we must teach the people the necessity of cleanliness, its virtues and its wholesomeness, for which purpose it is requisite that they should be intelligent, capable of understanding ideas conveyed in words, able to discern, able to read, able to think. In short, the people, as children, must first have been to school and properly taught there, whereas we have allowed the majority of the working people to grow up untaught, nearly half of them unable to read and write, and then we expect them to display the virtues, prudence, judgment, and forethought of well-educated beings. It is of the first importance to teach people cleanly habits. This can be done without teaching them either reading or writing. Cleanliness is more than wholesomeness. It furnishes an atmosphere of self-respect and influences the moral condition of the entire household. It is the best exponent of the spirit of thrift. It is to the economy of the household what hygiene is to the human body. It should preside at every detail of domestic service. It indicates comfort and well-being. It is among the distinctive attributes of civilization and marks the progress of nations. Dr. Paley was accustomed to direct the particular attention of travelers in foreign countries to the condition of the people as respects cleanliness and the local provisions for the prevention of pollution. He was of opinion that a greater insight might thus be obtained into their habits of decency, self-respect, and industry, and into their moral and social condition generally, than from facts of any other description. People are cleanly in proportion as they are decent, industrious, and self-respecting. Unclean people are uncivilized. The dirty classes of great towns are invariably the dangerous classes of those towns. And if we would civilize the classes yet uncivilized, we must banish dirt from amongst them. Yet dirt forms no part of our nature. It is a parasite feeding upon human life and destroying it. It is hideous and disgusting. There can be no beauty where it is. The prettiest woman is made repulsive by it. Children are made fretful, impatient, and bad-tempered by it. Men are degraded and made reckless by it. There is little modesty where dirt is, for dirty is indecency. There can be little purity of mind where the person is impure, for the body is the temple of the soul, and must be cleansed and purified to be worthy of the shrine within. Dirt has an affinity with self-indulgence and drunkenness. The sanitary inquirers have clearly made out that the dirty classes are the drunken classes, and that they are prone to seek, in the stupefaction of beer, gin, and opium, a refuge from the miserable depression caused by the foul conditions in which they live. We need scarcely refer to the moral as well as the physical beauty of cleanliness. Cleanliness which indicates self-respect and is the root of many fine virtues, and especially of purity, delicacy, and decency. We might even go farther and say that purity of thought and feeling result from habitual purity of body, for the mind and heart of men are, to a very great extent, influenced by external conditions and circumstances, and habit and custom, as regards outward things, stamp themselves deeply on the whole character, alike upon the moral feelings and the intellectual powers. Moses was the most practical of sanitary reformers. Among the Eastern nations generally, cleanliness is a part of religion. They esteem it not only as next to godliness, but as a part of godliness itself. They connect the idea of internal sanctity with that of external purification. They feel that it would be an insult to the Maker they worship to come into his presence covered with impurity. Hence the Mohammedans devote almost as much care to the erection of baths as to that of mosques, and alongside the place of worship is usually found the place of cleansing, so that the faithful may have the ready means of purification previous to their act of worship. What worship, says a great writer, is there not in mere washing? Perhaps one of the most moral things a man, in common cases, has it in his power to do. Strip thyself, go into the bath, or whirl it into the limpid pool of a running brook, and there wash and be clean. Thou wilt step out again a purer and a better man. This consciousness of perfect outer pureness, that to thy skin there now adheres no foreign speck of imperfection, how it radiates on thee with cunning symbolic influences to thy very soul. Thou hast an increased tendency towards all good things whatsoever. The oldest Eastern sages, with joy and holy gratitude, had felt it to be so, and that it was the Maker's gift and will. The common well-being of men, women, and children depends upon attention to what at first sight may appear comparatively trivial matters. And unless these small matters be attended to, comfort in person, mind, and feeling is absolutely impossible. The physical satisfaction of a child, for example, depends upon attention to its feeding, clothing, and washing. These are the commonest of common things, and yet they are of the most essential importance. If the child is not properly fed and clothed, it will grow up feeble and ill-conditioned, and as the child is, so will the man be. Grown people cannot be comfortable without regular attention to these common matters. Everyone needs, and ought to have, comfort at home, and comfort is the united product of cleanliness, thrift, regularity, industry, in short, a continuous performance of duties, each in itself apparently trivial. The cooking of a potato, the baking of a loaf, the mending of a shirt, the darning of a pair of stockings, the making of a bed, the scrubbing of a floor, the washing and dressing of a baby are all matters of no great moment. But a woman ought to know how to do these before the management of a household, however poor, is entrusted to her. Why, asked Lord Ashburton in a lecture to the students of the Wolfsea training schools, why was one mother of a family a better economist than another? Why could one live in abundance where another starved? Why, in similar dwellings, were the children of one parent healthy, of another puny and ailing? Why could this labourer do with ease a task that would kill his fellow? It was not luck nor chance that decided those differences. It was the patient observation of nature that suggested to some gifted minds rules for their guidance which had escaped the heedlessness of others. It is not so much, however, the patient observation of nature as good training in the home and in the school that enables some women to accomplish so much more than others in the development of human beings and the promotion of human comfort. And to do this efficiently, women as well as men require to be instructed as to the nature of the objects upon which they work. Take one branch of science as an illustration, the physiological. In this science, we hold that every woman should receive some instruction. And why? Because if the laws of physiology were understood by women, children would grow up into better, healthier, happier, and probably wiser men and women. Children are subject to certain physiological laws, the observance of which is necessary for their health and comfort. Is it not reasonable, therefore, to expect that women should know something of those laws and of their operation? If they are ignorant of them, they will be liable to commit all sorts of blunders, productive of suffering, disease, and death. To what are we to attribute the frightful mortality of children in most of our large towns, where 1/2 of all that are born perish before they reach their 5th year? If women, as well as men, knew something of the laws of healthy living, about the nature of the atmosphere, how its free action upon the blood is necessary to health, of the laws of ventilation, cleanliness, and nutrition, we cannot but think that the moral, not less than the physical condition of the human beings committed to their charge would be greatly improved and promoted. Were anything like a proper attention given to common things, there would not be such an amount of discomfort, disease, and mortality amongst the young. But we accustom people to act as if there were no such provisions as natural laws. If we violate them, we do not escape the consequences because we have been ignorant of their mode of operation. We have been provided with intelligence that we might know them. And if society keep its members blind and ignorant, the evil consequences are inevitably reaped. Thus tens of thousands perish for lack of knowledge of even the smallest and yet most necessary conditions of right living. Women have also need to be taught the important art of domestic economy. If they do not earn the family income, at least they have to spend the money earned. And their instruction ought to have a view to the spending of that money wisely. For this purpose, a knowledge of arithmetic is absolutely necessary. Some may say, what use can a woman have for arithmetic? But when men marry, they soon find this out. If the woman who has a household to manage be innocent of addition and multiplication, and if she fail to keep a record of her income or expenditure, she will, before long, find herself in great trouble. She will find that she cannot make the ends meet and then run into debt. If she spent too much on dress, she will have too little for food or education. She will commit extravagances in one direction or another, and thus subject her household to great discomfort. She may also bring her husband into trouble through the debts she has contracted, and make a beginning of his misfortunes and sometimes of his ruin. Much might be said in favor of household management, and especially in favor of improved cookery. Ill-cooked meals is a source of discomfort in many families. Bad cooking is waste of money and loss of comfort. Whom God has joined in matrimony, ill-cooked joints and ill-boiled potatoes have very often put asunder. Among the common things which educators should teach the rising generation, this ought certainly not to be overlooked. It is the commonest and yet most neglected of the branches of female education. The greater part of human labor is occupied in the direct production of the materials for human food. The farming classes and the laborers devote themselves to the planting, rearing, and reaping of oats and other cereals, and the grazing farmer to the production of cattle and sheep for the maintenance of the population at large. All these articles, corn, beef, mutton, and such like, are handed over to the female half of the human species to be converted into food, for the sustenance of themselves, their husbands, and their families. How do they use their power? Can they cook? Have they been taught to cook? Is it not a fact that, in this country, cooking is one of the lost or undiscovered arts? Thousands of artisans and laborers are deprived of half the actual nutriment of their food, and continue half-starved because their wives are utterly ignorant of the art of cooking. They are yet in entire darkness as to the economizing of food and the means of rendering it palatable and digestible. Even the middle classes are badly served in this respect. If we could see, says a public writer, by the help of an Asmodeus, what is going on at the dinner hour of the humbler of the middle class, what a spectacle of discomfort, waste, ill-temper, and consequent ill-conduct it would be. The man quarrels with his wife because there's nothing he can eat, and he generally makes up in drink for the deficiencies in the article of food. There is thus not only the direct waste of food and detriment to health, but the further consequent waste of the use of spirits with its injury to the habits and the health. On the other hand, people who eat well drink moderately, the satisfaction of the appetite dispensing with the necessity for resorting to stimulants. Good humour too, and good health, follow a good meal. And by a good meal we mean anything, however simple, well dressed in its way. A rich man may live very expensively and very ill, and a poor man may live frugally and very well, if it be his good fortune to have a good cook in his wife or in his servant. The most worthless unit in a family is an ill-managing wife, or an indolent woman of any sort. The fair sex are sometimes very acute in what concerns themselves. They keep a tight hand over their dressmakers and milliners. They can tell to a thread when a flounce is too narrow or a tuck too deep. But if their knowledge only extends to their own dress, they are not helpmeets, but encumbrances. If they know nothing of their kitchen and are at the mercy of the cook, their table will soon be intolerable. Bad soup, soft and flabby fish, meat burnt outside and raw within. The husband will soon fly from the Barmecide feast and take refuge in his club, where he will not only find food that he can digest, but at the same time fly from the domestic discord that usually accompanies ill-cooked victuals at home. Mr. Smee says that diseases of the digestive organs greatly exceed in England the relative number found in other countries. The reason is that in no other country do men eat so much ill-cooked food. The least observant of travellers must have been struck with admiration at the readiness with which a dinner of 8 or 10 dishes of various eatables makes its appearance in foreign inns, particularly when he remembers the perpetual mutton chop and mashed potatoes of the English road. The author remembers arriving at a roadside inn in a remote part of Dauphiny, immediately under the foot of the Pic du Midi. On looking at the clay floor and the worn state of the furniture, he remarked to his friend, "Surely we can get no dinner here?" "Wait till you see," was his answer. In about half an hour, the table, though propped up, was spread with a clean tablecloth and successive dishes of soup, fowl, roast beef, pommes de terre frites, French beans, with wholesome bread and butter made their appearance. In the principal inns of most provincial towns in England it would not have been possible to obtain such a dinner. Great would be the gain to the community if cookery were made an ordinary branch of female education. To the poor, the gain would be incalculable. Among the prizes which the bountifuls of both sexes are fond of bestowing in the country, we should like to see some offered for the best boiled potato, the best grilled mutton chop, and the best seasoned hodgepodge, soup or broth. In writing of a well-boiled potato, we are aware that we shall incur the contempt of many for attaching importance to a thing they suppose to be so common. But the fact is that their contempt arises, as is often the origin of contempt, from their ignorance, there being not one person in 100 who has ever seen and tasted that great rarity, a well-boiled potato. In short, we want common sense in cookery, as in most other things. Food should be used and not abused. Much of it is now absolutely wasted for want of a little art in cooking it. Food is not only wasted by bad cooking, but much of it is thrown away which French women would convert into something savoury and digestible. Health, morals, and family enjoyments are all connected with the question of cookery. Above all, it is the handmaid of thrift. It makes the most and the best of the bounties of God. It wastes nothing, but turns everything to account. Every English woman, whether gentle or simple, ought to be accomplished in an art which confers so much comfort, health, and wealth upon the members of her household. It appears to me, says Mrs. Margaretta Gray, that with an increase of wealth unequally distributed and a pressure of population, there has sprung up amongst us a spurious refinement that calms the energy and circumscribes the usefulness of women in the upper class of society. A lady, to be such, must be a lady, and nothing else. Ladies dismissed from the dairy, the confectionery, the storeroom, the still-room, the poultry-yard, the kitchen garden, and the orchard. She might have added, the spinning-wheel, have hardly yet found for themselves a sphere equally useful and important in the pursuits of trade and art to which to apply their too abundant leisure. When, at any time, has society presented, on the one hand, so large an array of respectably educated individuals, embarrassed for want of a proper calling, and on the other, so ponderous a multitude of untrained, neglected poor, who cannot, without help, rise out of their misery and degradation. What an obstruction to usefulness and all eminence of character is that of being too rich or too genteelly connected to work at anything. Many intelligent, high-minded ladies, who have felt disgusted at the idleness to which society condemns them, have of late years undertaken the work of visiting the poor and of nursing, a noble work. But there is another school of usefulness which stands open to them. Let them study the art of common cookery and diffuse the knowledge of it amongst the people. They will thus do an immense amount of good and bring down the blessings of many a half-hungered husband upon their benevolent heads. Women of the poorer classes require much help from those who are better educated or who have been placed in better circumstances than themselves. The greater number of them marry young and suddenly enter upon a life for which they have not received the slightest preparation. They know nothing of cookery, of sewing, or clothes mending, or of economical ways of spending their husband's money. Hence slatternly and untidy habits and uncomfortable homes, from which the husband is often glad to seek refuge in the nearest public house. The following story, told by Joseph Corbett, a Birmingham operative, before a parliamentary committee, holds true of many working people in the manufacturing districts. "My mother," he said, "worked in a manufactory from a very early age. She was clever and industrious, and, moreover, she had the reputation of being virtuous. She was regarded as an excellent match for a working man. She was married early. She became the mother of 11 children. I am the eldest. To the best of her ability she performed the important duties of a wife and mother. But she was lamentably deficient in domestic knowledge, in that most important of all human instruction, how to make the home and the fireside to possess a charm for her husband and children. She had never received one single lesson. She had children apace. As she recovered from her lying in, so she went to work, the babe being brought to her at stated times to receive nourishment. As the family increased, so everything like comfort disappeared altogether. The power to make home cheerful and comfortable was never given to her. She knew not the value of cherishing in my father's mind a love of domestic objects. Not one moment's happiness did I ever see under my father's roof. All this dismal state of things I can distinctly trace to the entire and perfect absence of all training and instruction to my mother. He became intemperate, and his intemperance made her necessitous. She made many efforts to abstain from shop work, but her pecuniary necessities forced her back into the shop. The family was large, and every moment was required at home. I have known her, after the close of a hard day's work, sit up nearly all night for several nights together, washing and mending clothes. My father could have no comfort there. These domestic obligations, which in a well-regulated house, even in that of a working man, where there are prudence and good management, would be done so as not to annoy the husband, were to my father a sort of annoyance, and he, from an ignorant and mistaken notion, sought comfort in an alehouse. My mother's ignorance of household duties, my father's consequent irritability and intemperance, the frightful poverty, the constant quarrelling, the pernicious example to my brothers and sisters, the bad effect upon the future conduct of my brothers, one and all of us being forced out to work so young that our feeble earnings would produce only 1 shilling a week. Cold and hunger and the innumerable sufferings of my childhood crowd upon my mind and overpower me. They keep alive a deep anxiety for the emancipation of thousands of families in this great town, Birmingham, and neighborhood, who are in a similar state of horrible misery. My own experience tells me that the instruction of the females in the work of a house, in teaching them to produce cheerfulness and comfort at the fireside, would prevent a great amount of misery and crime. There would be fewer drunken husbands and disobedient children. As a working man, within my own observation, female education is disgracefully neglected. I attach more importance to it than to anything else, for woman imparts the first impressions to the young susceptible mind. She models the child from which is formed the future man. End of section 28. Read by Astrid Weinmann, London.
Section number 29 of Thrift. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Thrift by Samuel Smiles. Section 29, Chapter 16, The Art of Living, Part 1. Deem no man, in any age, gentle for his lineage. Though he be not highly born, he is gentle if he doth what longeth to a gentleman. Chaucer. Every one is the son of his own work. Cervantes. Serve a noble disposition, though poor, the time comes that he will repay thee. George Herbert. Although men are accused for not knowing their own weakness, yet perhaps as few know their own strength. It is in men as in soils, where sometimes there is a vein of gold, which the owner knows not of. Swift. Let not what I cannot have my cheer of mind destroy. Cibber. The art of living deserves a place among the fine arts. Like literature, it may be ranked with the humanities. It is the art of turning the means of living to the best account, of making the best of everything. It is the art of extracting from life its highest enjoyment, and, through it, of reaching its highest results. To live happily, the exercise of no small degree of art is required. Like poetry and painting, the art of living comes chiefly by nature, but all can cultivate and develop it. It can be fostered by parents and teachers and perfected by self-culture. Without intelligence, it cannot exist. Happiness is not like a large and beautiful gem, so uncommon and rare that all search for it is vain, all efforts to obtain it hopeless. But it consists of a series of smaller and commoner gems, grouped and set together, forming a pleasing and graceful whole. Happiness consists in the enjoyment of little pleasures scattered along the common path of life, which, in the eager search for some great and exciting joy, we are apt to overlook. It finds delight in the performance of common duties, faithfully and honorably fulfilled. The art of living is abundantly exemplified in actual life. Take 2 men of equal means, one of whom knows the art of living, and the other not. The one has the seeing eye and the intelligent mind. Nature is ever new to him and full of beauty. He can live in the present, rehearse the past, or anticipate the glory of the future. With him, life has a deep meaning and requires the performance of duties which are satisfactory to his conscience and are therefore pleasurable. He improves himself, acts upon his age, helps to elevate the depressed classes, and is active in every good work. His hand is never tired, his mind is never weary. He goes through life joyfully, helping others to its enjoyment. Intelligence, ever expanding, gives him every day fresh insight into men and things. He lays down his life full of honor and blessing, and his greatest monument is the good deeds he has done and the beneficent example he has set before his fellow creatures. The other has comparatively little pleasure in life. He has scarcely reached manhood ere he has exhausted its enjoyments. Money has done everything that it could for him, yet he feels life to be vacant and cheerless. Traveling does him no good, for him history has no meaning. He is only alive to the impositions of innkeepers and couriers, and the disagreeableness of traveling for days amidst great mountains, among peasants and sheep, cramped up in a carriage. Picture galleries he feels to be a bore, and he looks into them because other people do. These pleasures soon tire him, and he becomes blasé. When he grows old and has run the round of fashionable dissipations, and there is nothing left which he can relish, life becomes a masquerade, in which he recognizes only knaves, hypocrites, and flatterers. Though he does not enjoy life, yet he is terrified to leave it. Then the curtain falls. With all his wealth, life has been to him a failure, for he has not known the art of living, without which life cannot be enjoyed. It is not wealth that gives the true zest to life, but reflection, appreciation, taste, culture. Above all, the seeing eye and the feeling heart are indispensable. With these, the humblest lot may be made blessed. Labor and toil may be associated with the highest thoughts and the purest tastes. The lot of labor may thus become elevated and ennobled. Montaigne observes that all moral philosophy is as applicable to a vulgar and private life as to the most splendid. Every man carries the entire form of the human condition within him. Even in material comfort, good taste is a real economist, as well as an enhancer of joy. Scarcely have you passed the doorstep of your friend's house when you can detect whether taste presides within it or not. There is an air of neatness, order, arrangement, grace, and refinement that gives a thrill of pleasure, though you cannot define it or explain how it is. There is a flower in the window or a picture against the wall that marks the home of taste. A bird sings at the windowsill, books lie about, and the furniture, though common, is tidy, suitable, and, it may be, even elegant. The art of living extends to all the economies of the household. It selects wholesome food and serves it with taste. There is no profusion. The fare may be very humble, but it has a savor about it. Everything is so clean and neat, the water so sparkles in the glass, that you do not desire richer viands or a more exciting beverage. Look into another house, and you will see profusion enough without either taste or order. The expenditure is larger, and yet you do not feel at home there. The atmosphere seems to be full of discomfort. Books, hats, shawls, and stockings in course of repair are strewn about. 2 or 3 chairs are loaded with goods. The rooms are hugger-mugger. No matter how much money is spent, it does not mend matters. Taste is wanting, for the manager of the household has not yet learnt the art of living. You see the same contrast in cottage life. The lot of poverty is sweetened by taste. It selects the healthiest, openest neighborhood, where the air is pure and the streets are clean. You see, at a glance, by the sanded doorstep and the window panes without a speck, perhaps blooming roses or geraniums shining through them, that the tenant within, however poor, knows the art of making the best of his lot. How different from the foul cottage dwellings you see elsewhere, with the dirty children playing in the gutters, the slattern-like women lounging by the door-cheek, and the air of sullen poverty that seems to pervade the place. And yet the weekly income in the former house may be no greater, perhaps even less, than in that of the other. How is it that of 2 men working in the same field or in the same shop, one is merry as a lark, always cheerful, well-clad, and as clean as his work will allow him to be, comes out on Sunday mornings in his best suit to go to church with his family, is never without a penny in his purse, and has something besides in the savings bank, is a reader of books and a subscriber to a newspaper, besides taking in some literary journal for family reading, whilst the other man, with equal or even superior weekly wages, comes to work in the mornings sour and sad, is always full of grumbling, is badly clad and badly shod, is never seen out of his house on Sundays till about midday, when he appears in his shirt sleeves, his face unwashed, his hair unkempt, his eyes bleared and bloodshot, his children left to run about the gutters with no one apparently to care for them, is always at his last coin, except on Saturday night, and then he has a long score of borrowings to repay, belongs to no club, has nothing saved, but lives literally from hand to mouth, reads none, thinks none, but only toils, eats, drinks, and sleeps. Why is it that there is so remarkable a difference between these two men? Simply for this reason, that the one has the intelligence and the art to extract joy and happiness from life, to be happy himself, and to make those about him happy, whereas the other has not cultivated his intelligence, and knows nothing whatever of the art of either making himself or his family happy. With the one, life is a scene of loving, helping, and sympathizing, of carefulness, forethought, and calculation, of reflection, action, and duty. With the other, it is only a rough scramble for meat and drink, duty is not thought of, reflection is banished, prudent forethought is never for a moment entertained. But look to the result. The former is respected by his fellow workmen and beloved by his family. He is an example of well-being and well-doing to all who are within reach of his influence, whereas the other is as unreflective and miserable as nature will allow him to be. He is shunned by good men, his family are afraid at the sound of his footsteps, his wife perhaps trembling at his approach. He dies without leaving any regrets behind him, except, it may be, on the part of his family, who are left to be maintained by the charity of the public or by the pittance doled out by the overseers. For these reasons, it is worth every man's while to study the important art of living happily. Even the poorest man may by this means extract an increased amount of joy and blessing from life. The world need not be a vale of tears, unless we ourselves will it to be so. We have the command, to a great extent, over our own lot. At all events, our mind is our own possession. We can cherish happy thoughts here. We can regulate and control our tempers and dispositions to a considerable extent. We can educate ourselves and bring out the better part of our nature, which in most men is allowed to sleep a deep sleep. We can read good books, cherish pure thoughts, and lead lives of peace, temperance, and virtue, so as to secure the respect of good men and transmit the blessing of a faithful example to our successors. The art of living is best exhibited in the home. The first condition of a happy home, where good influences prevail over bad ones, is comfort. Where there are carking cares, querulousness, untidiness, slovenliness, and dirt, there can be little comfort either for man or woman. The husband, who has been working all day, expects to have something as a compensation for his toil. The least that his wife can do for him is to make his house snug, clean, and tidy, against his homecoming at eve. That is the truest economy, the best housekeeping, the worthiest domestic management, which makes the home so pleasant and agreeable that a man feels when approaching it that he is about to enter a sanctuary, and that, when there is no alehouse attraction that can draw him away from it. Some say that we worship comfort too much. The word is essentially English and is said to be untranslatable in its full meaning into any foreign language. It is intimately connected with the fireside. In warmer climes, people contrive to live out of doors. They sun themselves in the streets. Half their life is in public. The genial air woos them forth and keeps them abroad. They enter their houses merely to eat and sleep. They can scarcely be said to live there. How different it is with us! The raw air without, during so many months of the year, drives us within doors. Hence we cultivate all manner of home pleasures. Hence the host of delightful associations which rise up in the mind at the mention of the word home. Hence our household god, comfort. We are not satisfied merely with a home. It must be comfortable. The most wretched, indeed, are those who have no homes, the homeless. But not less wretched are those whose homes are without comfort. those of whom Charles Lamb once said, "The homes of the very poor are no homes." It is comfort, then, that is the soul of the home, its essential principle, its vital element. Comfort does not mean merely warmth, good furniture, good eating and drinking. It means something higher than this. It means cleanliness, pure air, order, frugality. In a word, house thrift and domestic government. Comfort is the soil in which the human being grows, not only physically, but morally. Comfort lies, indeed, at the root of many virtues. Wealth is not necessary for comfort. Luxury requires wealth, but not comfort. A poor man's home, moderately supplied with the necessaries of life, presided over by a clearly frugal housewife, may contain all the elements of comfortable living. Comfortlessness is for the most part caused not so much by the absence of sufficient means as by the absence of the requisite knowledge of domestic management. Comfort, it must be admitted, is in a great measure relative. What is comfort to one man would be misery to another. Even the commonest mechanic of this day would consider it miserable to live after the style of the nobles a few centuries ago, to sleep on straw beds, and to live in rooms littered with rushes. William the Conqueror had neither a shirt to his back nor a pane of glass to his windows. Queen Elizabeth was one of the first to wear silk stockings. The queens before her were stockingless. Comfort depends as much on persons as on things. It is out of the character and temper of those who govern homes that the feeling of comfort arises, much more than out of handsome furniture, heated rooms, or household luxuries and conveniences. Comfortable people are kindly tempered. Good temper may be set down as an invariable condition of comfort. There must be peace, mutual forbearance, mutual help, and a disposition to make the best of everything. Better is a dinner of herbs where love is, than a stalled ox and hatred therewith. Comfortable people are persons of common sense, discretion, prudence, and economy. They have a natural affinity for honesty and justice, goodness and truth. They do not run into debt, for that is a species of dishonesty. They live within their means and lay by something for a rainy day. They provide for the things of their own household, yet they are not wanting in hospitality and benevolence on fitting occasions, and what they do is done without ostentation. Comfortable people do everything in order. They are systematic, steady, sober, industrious. They dress comfortably. They adapt themselves to the season, neither shivering in winter nor perspiring in summer. They do not toil after a fashionable appearance. They expend more on warm stockings than on gold rings, and prefer healthy, good bedding to gaudy window curtains. Their chairs are solid, not gimcrack. They will bear sitting upon, that they may not be ornamental. The organization of the home depends for the most part upon woman. She is necessarily the manager of every family and household. How much, therefore, must depend upon her intelligent cooperation. Man's life revolves around woman. She is the sun of his social system. She is the queen of domestic life. The comfort of every home mainly depends upon her character, her temper, her power of organization, and her business management. A man may be economical, but unless there be economy at home, his frugality will be comparatively useless. A man cannot thrive, the proverb says, unless his wife let him. House thrift is homely, but beneficent. Though unseen of the world, it makes many people happy. It works upon individuals, and by elevating them, it elevates society itself. It is, in fact, a receipt of infallible efficacy for conferring the greatest possible happiness upon the greatest possible number. Without it, legislation, benevolence, and philanthropy are mere palliatives, sometimes worse than useless, because they hold out hopes which are for the most part disappointed. How happy does a man go forth to his labor or his business, and how doubly happy does he return from it, when he knows that his means are carefully husbanded and wisely applied by a judicious and well-managing wife. Such a woman is not only a power in her own house, but her example goes forth amongst her neighbors, and she stands before them as a model and a pattern. The habits of her children are formed after her habits. Her actual life becomes the model after which they unconsciously mold themselves. For example always speaks more eloquently than words. It is instruction in action, wisdom at work. First among woman's qualities is the intelligent use of her hands and fingers. Everyone knows how useful, how indispensable to the comfort of a household is the tidy, managing, handy woman. Pestalozzi, with his usual sagacity, has observed that half the education of a woman comes through her fingers. There are wisdom and virtue at her finger ends. But intellect must also accompany thrift. They must go hand in hand. A woman must not only be clever with her fingers, but possessed of the power of organizing household work. There must be method. The late Sir Arthur Helps observed that, as women are at present educated, they are for the most part thoroughly deficient in method. But this surely might be remedied by training. To take a very humble and simple instance, why is it that a man cook is always better than a woman cook? Simply because a man is more methodical in his arrangements and relies more upon his weights and measures. An eminent physician told me that he thought women were absolutely deficient in the appreciation of time. But this I hold to be merely one instance of their general want of accuracy, for which there are easy remedies, that is, easy if begun early enough. Accordingly, to manage a household efficiently, there must be method. Without this, work cannot be got through satisfactorily, either in offices, workshops, or households. By arranging work properly, by doing everything at the right time, and with a view to the economy of labor, a large amount of business can be accomplished. Muddle flies before method, and hugger-mugger disappears. There is also a method in spending, in laying out money, which is as valuable to the housewife as method is in accomplishing her work. Money slips through the fingers of some people like quicksilver. We have already seen that many men are spendthrifts, but many women are the same. At least they do not know how to expend their husband's earnings to the best advantage. You observe things very much out of place. Frills and ruffles and ill-darned stockings, fine bonnets and clouded shoes, silk gowns and dirty petticoats, while the husband goes about ragged and torn with scarcely a clean thing about him. Industry is of course essential. This is the soul of business. But without method, industry will be less productive. Industry may sometimes look like confusion, but a methodical and industrious woman gets through her work in a quiet, steady style, without fuss or noise or dust clouds. Prudence is another important household qualification. Prudence comes from cultivated judgment. It means practical wisdom. It has reference to fitness, to propriety. It judges of the right thing to be done and of the right way of doing it. It calculates the means, order, time, and method of doing. Prudence learns much from experience, quickened by knowledge. Punctuality is another eminently household qualification. How many grumblings would be avoided in domestic life by a little more attention being paid to this virtue? Late breakfasts and late dinners, too late for church and market, cleanings out of time, and washings protracted till midnight, bills put off with a call again tomorrow, engagements and promises unfulfilled. What a host of little nuisances spring to mind at thought of the unpunctual housewife. The unpunctual woman, like the unpunctual man, becomes disliked because she consumes our time, interferes with our plans, causes uneasy feelings, and virtually tells us that we are not of sufficient importance to cause her to be more punctual. To the businessman, time is money, and to the businesswoman, it is more. It is peace, comfort, and domestic prosperity. Perseverance is another good household habit. Lay down a good plan and adhere to it. Do not be turned from it without a sufficient reason. Follow it diligently and faithfully, and it will yield fruits in good season. If the plan be a prudent one, based on practical wisdom, all things will gravitate towards it, and a mutual dependence will gradually be established among all the parts of the domestic system. We might furnish numerous practical illustrations of the truth of these remarks, but our space is nearly filled up, and we must leave the reader to supply them from his or her own experience. There are many other illustrations which might be adduced of the art of making life happy. The management of the temper is an art full of beneficent results. By kindness, cheerfulness, and forbearance, we can be happy almost at will, and at the same time spread happiness about us on every side. We can encourage happy thoughts in ourselves and others. We can be sober in habit. What can a wife and her children think of an intemperate husband and father? We can be sober in language and shun cursing and swearing, the most useless, unmeaning, and brutal of vulgarities. Nothing can be so silly and unmeaning, not to say shocking, repulsive, and sinful, as the oaths so common in the mouths of vulgar swearers. They are profanation without purpose, impiety without provocation, blasphemy without excuse. This leads us to remark in passing that in this country we are not sufficiently instructed in the art of good manners. We are rather gruff and sometimes unapproachable. Manners do not make the man, as the proverb alleges, but manners make the man much more agreeable. A man may be noble in his heart, true in his dealings, virtuous in his conduct, and yet unmannerly. Suavity of disposition and gentleness of manners give the finish to the true gentleman. By good manners we do not mean etiquette. This is only a conventional set of rules adopted by what is called good society, and many of the rules of etiquette are of the essence of rudeness. Etiquette does not permit genteel people to recognize in the streets a man with a shabby coat, though he be their brother. Etiquette is a liar in its not at home, ordered to be told by servants to callers at inconvenient seasons. Good manners include many requisites, but they chiefly consist in politeness, courtesy, and kindness. They cannot be taught by rule, but they may be taught by example. It has been said that politeness is the art of showing men, by external signs, the internal regard we have for them. But a man may be perfectly polite to another without necessarily having any regard for him. Good manners are neither more nor less than beautiful behavior. It has been well said that a beautiful form is better than a beautiful face, and a beautiful behavior is better than a beautiful form. It gives a higher pleasure than statues or pictures. It is the finest of fine arts. Manner is the ornament of action, indeed a good action, and without a good manner of doing it, is stripped of half its value. A poor fellow gets into difficulties and solicits help of a friend. He obtains it, but it is with a, "There, take that, but I don't like lending." The help is given with a kind of kick, and is scarcely accepted as a favor. The manner of the giving long rankles in the mind of the acceptor. Thus, good manners mean kind manners, benevolence being the preponderating element in all kinds of pleasant intercourse between human beings. A story is told of a poor soldier having one day called at the shop of a hairdresser, who was busy with his customers, and asked relief, stating that he had stayed beyond his leave of absence, and unless he could get a lift on the coach, fatigue and severe punishment awaited him. The hairdresser listened to his story respectfully and gave him a guinea. "God bless you, sir," exclaimed the soldier, astonished at the amount. "How can I repay you? I have nothing in the world but this," pulling out a dirty piece of paper from his pocket. "It is a receipt for making blacking. It is the best that was ever seen. Many a half-guinea I have had for it from the officers, and many bottles I have sold. May you be able to get something for it to repay you for your kindness to the poor soldier." Oddly enough, that dirty piece of paper proved worth $500,000 of money to the hairdresser. It was no less than the receipt for the famous Day and Martin's backing, the hairdresser being the late wealthy Mr. Day, whose manufactory is one of the notabilities of the metropolis. End of section 29. Section 30 of Thrift. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Thrift by Samuel Smiles. The Art of Living, Part 2. Good manners have been supposed to be a peculiar mark of gentility, and that the individual exhibiting them has been born in some upper class of society. But the poorest classes may exhibit good manners towards each other, as well as the richest. One may be polite and kind towards others, without a penny in the purse. Politeness goes very far, yet it costs nothing. It is the cheapest of commodities. But we want to be taught good manners, as well as other things. Some happy natures are to the manner born, but the bulk of men need to be taught manners, and this can only be efficiently done in youth. We have said that working men might study good manners with advantage. Why should they not respect themselves and each other? It is by their demeanor towards each other, in other words, by their manners, that self-respect and mutual respect are indicated. We have been struck by the habitual politeness of even the poorest classes on the continent. The workman lifts his cap and respectfully salutes his fellow workman in passing. There is no sacrifice of manliness in this, but rather grace and dignity. The working man, in respecting his fellow, respects himself and his order. There is kindness in the act of recognition, as well as in the manner in which it is denoted. We might learn much from the French people in this matter. They are not only polite to each other, but they have a greater respect for property. Some may be disposed to doubt this after the recent destruction of buildings in Paris, but the communists must be regarded as altogether exceptional people, and to understand the French character, we must look to the body of the population scattered throughout France. There we find property much more respected by the people than amongst ourselves. Even the beggar respects the fruit by the roadside, although there is nobody to protect it. The reason of this is that France is a nation of small proprietors, that property is much more generally diffused and exposed, and parents of even the lowest class educate their children in carefulness of and fidelity to the property of others. This respect for property is also accompanied with that respect for the feelings of others, which constitutes what is called good manners. This is carefully inculcated in the children of all ranks in France. They are very rarely rude. They are civil to strangers. They are civil to each other. Mr. Lang, in his Notes of a Traveler, makes these remarks. This deference to the feelings of others in all that we do is a moral habit of great value when it is generally diffused, and enters into the home training of every family. It is an education both of the parent and child in morals, carried on through the medium of external manners. It is a fine distinction of the French national character and of social economy that practical morality is more generally taught through manners among and by the people themselves than in any country in Europe. The same kindly feeling might be observed throughout the entire social intercourse of working men with each other. There is not a moment in their lives in which the opportunity does not occur for exhibiting good manners, in the workshop, in the street, and at home. Provided there be a wish to please others by kind looks and ways, the habit of combining good manners with every action will soon be formed. It is not merely the pleasure a man gives to others by being kind to them. He receives tenfold more pleasure himself. The man who gets up and offers his chair to a woman or to an old man, trivial though the act may seem, is rewarded by his own heart, and a thrill of pleasure runs through him the moment he has performed the kindness. Work people need to practice good manners towards each other the more, because they are under the necessity of constantly living with each other and amongst each other. They are in constant contact with their fellow workmen, whereas the richer classes need not mix with men unless they choose, and then they can select whom they like. The working man's happiness depends much more upon the kind looks, words, and acts of those immediately about him than the rich man's does. It is so in the workshop, and it is the same at home. There the workman cannot retire into his study, but must sit amongst his family, by the side of his wife, with his children about him, and he must either live kindly with them, performing kind and obliging acts towards his family, or he must see, suffer, and endure the intolerable misery of reciprocal unkindness. Admitted that there are difficulties in the way of working men cultivating the art of good manners, that their circumstances are often very limited and their position unfavorable, yet no man is so poor but that he can be civil and kind, if he choose, and to be civil and kind is the very essence of good manners. Even in the most adverse circumstances, a man may try to do his best. If he speak and act courteously and kindly to all, the result will be so satisfactory, so self-rewarding, that he cannot but be stimulated to persevere in the same course. He will diffuse pleasure about him in the home, make friends of his work fellows, and be regarded with increased kindness and respect by every right-minded employer. The civil workman will exercise increased power amongst his class, and gradually induce them to imitate him by his persistent steadiness, civility, and kindness. Thus, Benjamin Franklin, when a workman, reformed the habits of an entire workshop. Then, besides the general pleasure arising from the exercise of good manners, there is a great deal of healthful and innocent pleasure to be derived from amusements of various kinds. One cannot be always working, eating, and sleeping. There must be time for relaxation, time for mental pleasures, time for bodily exercise. There's a profound meaning in the word amusement, much more than most people are disposed to admit. In fact, amusement is an important part of education. It is a mistake to suppose that the boy or the man who plays at some outdoor game is wasting his time. Amusement of any kind is not wasting time, but economizing life. Relax and exercise frequently if you would enjoy good health. If you do not relax and take no exercise, the results will soon appear in bodily ailments, which always accompany sedentary occupations. The students, says Lord Derby, who think they have not time for bodily exercise will sooner or later find time for illness. There are people in the world who would, if they had the power, hang the heavens about with crape, throw a shroud over the beautiful and life-giving bosom of the planet, pick the bright stars from the sky, veil the sun with clouds, pluck the silver moon from her place in the firmament, shut up our gardens and fields, and all the flowers with which they are bedecked, and doom the world to an atmosphere of gloom and cheerlessness. There is no reason nor morality in this, and there is still less religion. A benevolent Creator has endowed man with an eminent capacity for enjoyment, has set in him a fair and lovely world, surrounded him with things good and beautiful, and given him the disposition to love, to sympathize, to help, to produce, to enjoy, and thus to become an honorable and happy being, bringing God's work to perfection and enjoying the divine creation in the midst of which he lives. Make a man happy, and his actions will be happy too. Doom him to dismal thoughts and miserable circumstances, and you will make him gloomy, discontented, morose, and probably vicious. Hence, coarseness and crime are almost invariably found amongst those who have never been accustomed to be cheerful, whose hearts have been shut against the purifying influences of a happy communion with nature, or an enlightened and cheerful intercourse with man. Man has a strong natural appetite for relaxation and amusement, and, like all other natural appetites, it has been implanted for a wise purpose. It cannot be repressed, but will break out in one form or another. Any well-directed attempt to promote an innocent amusement is worth a dozen sermons against pernicious ones. If we do not provide the opportunity for enjoying wholesome pleasures, men will certainly find out vicious ones for themselves. Sidney Smith truly said, "In order to attack vice with effect, we must set up something better in its place." Temperance reformers have not sufficiently considered how much the drinking habits of the country are the consequences of gross tastes, and of the too limited opportunities which exist in this country for obtaining access to amusements of an innocent and improving tendency. The workman's tastes have been allowed to remain uncultivated. Present wants engross his thoughts. That gratification of his appetites is his highest pleasure, and when he relaxes, it is to indulge immoderately in beer or whiskey. The Germans were at one time the drunkenest of nations. They are now among the soberest. As drunken as a German boor was a common proverb. How have they been weaned from drink? Principally by education and music. Music has a most humanizing effect. The cultivation of the art has a most favorable influence upon public morals. It furnishes a source of pleasure in every family. It gives home a new attraction. It makes social intercourse more cheerful. Father Matthew followed up his temperance movement by a singing movement. He promoted the establishment of musical clubs all over Ireland, for he felt that, as he had taken the people's whiskey from them, he must give them some wholesome stimulus in its stead. He gave them music. Singing classes were established to refine the taste, soften the manners, and humanize the mass of the Irish people. But we fear that the example set by Father Matthew has already been forgotten. What a fullness of enjoyment, says Channing, has our Creator placed within our reach, by surrounding us with an atmosphere which may be shaped into sweet sounds. And yet this goodness is almost lost upon us, through want of culture of the organ by which this provision is to be enjoyed. How much would the general cultivation of the gift of music improve us as a people? Children ought to learn it in schools, as they do in Germany. The voice of music would then be heard in every household. Our old English glees would no longer be forgotten. Men and women might sing in the intervals of their work, as the Germans do in going to and coming from their wars. The work would not be worse done, because it was done amidst music and cheerfulness. The breath of society would be sweetened, and pleasure would be linked with labor. Why not have some elegance in even the humblest home? We must, of course, have cleanliness, which is the special elegance of the poor. But why not have pleasant and delightful things to look upon? There is no reason why the humbler classes should not surround themselves with the evidence of beauty and comfort in all their shapes, and thus do homage alike to the gifts of God and the labors of man. The taste for the beautiful is one of the best and most useful endowments. It is one of the handmaids of civilization. Beauty and elegance do not necessarily belong to the homes of the rich. They are, or ought to be, all-pervading. Beauty in all things, in nature, in art, in science, in literature, in social and domestic life. How beautiful, and yet how cheap are flowers. Not exotics, but what are called common flowers. A rose, for instance, is among the most beautiful of the smiles of nature. The laughing flowers, exclaims the poet. But there is more than gaiety in blooming flowers, though it takes a wise man to see the beauty, the love, and the adaptation of which they are full. What should we think of one who had invented flowers, supposing that, before him, flowers were unknown? Would he not be regarded as the opener up of a paradise of new delight? Should we not hail the inventor as a genius, as a god? And yet these lovely offsprings of the earth have been speaking to man from the first dawn of his existence until now, telling him of the goodness and wisdom of the creative power, which bade the earth bring forth, not only that which was useful as food, but also flowers, the bright, consummate flowers to clothe it in beauty and joy. Bring one of the commonest field flowers into a room, place it on a table or chimney piece, and you seem to have brought a ray of sunshine into the place. There is a cheerfulness about flowers. What a delight are they to the drooping invalid! They are like a sweet draught of enjoyment, coming as messengers from the country, and seeming to say, "Come and see the place where we grow, and let your heart be glad in our presence." What can be more innocent than flowers? They are like children undimmed by sin. They are emblems of purity and truth, a source of fresh delight to the pure and innocent. The heart that does not love flowers, or the voice of a playful child, cannot be genial. It was a beautiful conceit that invented a language of flowers, by which lovers were enabled to express the feelings that they dare not openly speak. But flowers have a voice for all, old and young, rich and poor. To me, says Wordsworth, the meanest flower that blows can give thoughts that do often lie too deep for tears. Have a flower in the room by all means. It will cost only a penny, if your ambition is moderate, and the gratification it gives will be beyond price. If you can have a flower for your window, so much the better. What can be more delicious than the sun's light streaming through flowers, through the midst of crimson fuchsias or scarlet geraniums? To look out into the light through flowers, is that not poetry? And to break the force of the sunbeams by the tender resistance of green leaves? If you can train a nasturtium round the window, or some sweet peas, then you will have the most beautiful frame you can invent for the picture without, whether it be the busy crowd, or a distant landscape, or trees with their lights and shades, or the changes of the passing clouds. Anyone may thus look through flowers for the price of an old song. And what pure taste and refinement does it not indicate on the part of the cultivator? A flower in the window sweetens the air, makes the room look graceful, gives the sun's light a new charm, rejoices the eye, and links nature with beauty. The flower is a companion that will never say a cross thing to anyone, but will always look beautiful and smiling. Do not despise it because it is cheap, and because everybody may have the luxury as well as yourself. Common things are cheap, but common things are invariably the most valuable. Could we only have fresh air or sunshine by purchase, what luxuries they would be considered. But they are free to all, and we think little of their blessings. There is, indeed, much in nature that we do not yet half enjoy, because we shut our avenues of sensation and feeling. We are satisfied with the matter of fact, and look not for the spirit of fact, which is above it. If we open our minds to enjoyment, we might find tranquil pleasures spread about us on every side. We might live with the angels that visit us on every sunbeam, and sit with the fairies who wait on every flower. We want more loving knowledge to enable us to enjoy life, and we require to cultivate the art of making the most of the common means and appliances for enjoyment, which lie about us on every side. A snug and clean home, no matter how tiny it be, so that it be wholesome, windows into which the sun can shine cheerily, a few good books, and who would need be without a few good books in these days of universal cheapness? No duns at the door, and the cupboard well supplied, and with a flower in your room. There is none so poor as not to have about him these elements of pleasure. But why not, besides the beauty of nature, have a taste for the beauty of art? Why not hang up a picture in the room? Ingenious methods have been discovered, some of them quite recently, for almost infinitely multiplying works of art, by means of wood engravings, lithographs, photographs, and autotypes, which render it possible for every person to furnish his rooms with beautiful pictures. Skill and science have thus brought art within reach of the poorest. Any picture, print, or engraving that represents a noble thought, that depicts a heroic act, or that brings a bit of nature from the fields or the streets into our room, is a teacher, a means of education, and a help to self-culture. It serves to make the home more pleasant and attractive. It sweetens domestic life and sheds a grace and beauty about it. It draws the gazer away from mere considerations of self and increases his store of delightful associations with the world without, as well as the world within. The portrait of a great man, for instance, helps us to read his life. It invests him with a personal interest. Looking at his features, we feel as if we knew him better and were more closely related to him. Such a portrait, hung up before us daily, at our meals and during our leisure hours, unconsciously serves to lift us up and sustain us. It is a link that in some way binds us to a higher and nobler nature. It is said of a Catholic moneylender that when about to cheat, he was wont to draw a veil over the face of his favorite saint. Thus, the portraiture of a great and virtuous man is in some measure a companionship of something better than ourselves. And though we may not reach the standard of the hero, we may to a certain extent be influenced by his likeness on our walls. It is not necessary that a picture should be high-priced in order to be beautiful and good. We have seen things for which hundreds of guineas have been paid, that have not 1/100th part of the meaning of beauty that is found in Linton's woodcut of Raphael's Madonna, which may be had for 2d. The head reminds one of the observation made by Hazlitt upon a picture, that it seems as if an unhandsome act would be impossible in its presence. It embodies the ideas of mother's love, womanly beauty, and earnest piety. As some one said of the picture, it looks as if a bit of heaven were in the room. Picture fanciers pay not so much for the merit as for the age and the rarity of their works. The poorest may have the seeing eye for beauty, while the rich man may be blind to it. The cheapest engraving may communicate the sense of beauty to the artisan, while 1,000-guinea picture may fail to communicate to the millionaire anything, excepting, perhaps, the notion that he has got possessions of a work which the means of other people cannot compass. Does the picture give you pleasure in looking at it? That is one good test of its worth. You may grow tired of it, your taste may outgrow it, and demand something better, just as the reader may grow out of Montgomery's poetry into Milton's. Then you will take down the daub and put up a picture with a higher idea in its place. There may thus be a steady progress of art made upon the room walls. If the pictures can be put in frames, so much the better. But if they cannot, no matter, up with them. We know that Owen Jones says it is not good taste to hang prints upon walls. He would merely hang room papers there. But Owen Jones may not be infallible, and here we think he is wrong. To our eyes, a room always looks unfurnished, no matter how costly and numerous the tables, chairs, and ottomans, unless there be pictures upon the walls. It ought to be, and no doubt is, a great stimulus to artists to know that their works are now distributed in prints and engravings, to decorate and beautify the homes of the people. The woodcutter, the lithographer, and the engraver are the popular interpreters of the great artist. Thus, Turner's pictures are not confined to the wealthy possessors of the original works, but may be diffused through all homes by the Millers and Brandards and Wilmots who have engraved them. Thus, Landseer finds entrance through woodcuts and mezzotints into every dwelling. Thus, Cruikshank preaches temperance, and Ari Scheffer purity and piety. The engraver is the medium by which art in the palace is conveyed into the humblest homes in the kingdom. The art of living may be displayed in many ways. It may be summed up in the words, "Make the best of everything." Nothing is beneath its care, even common and little things it turns to account. It gives a brightness and grace to the home, and invests nature with new charms. Through it, we enjoy the rich man's parks and woods, as if they were our own. We inhale the common air, and bask under the universal sunshine. We glory in the grass, the passing clouds, and the flowers. We love the common earth, and hear joyful voices through all nature. It extends to every kind of social intercourse. It engenders cheerful goodwill and loving sincerity. By its help, we make others happy and ourselves blessed. We elevate our being and ennoble our lot. We rise above the groveling creatures of earth and aspire to the infinite, and thus we link time to eternity, where the true art of living has its final consummation. End of section 30. End of Thrift by Samuel Smiles.